Now, the first assessment criteria of your level 6 module 3, in this case, Global Strategic Supply Chain Management, requires you to be in a position to assess the relationship between functional, business, and corporate levels of strategy. Which means by the time you're done with this video, you will be able to understand the relationship between supply chain, business, and corporate levels of strategy, the impact of supply chain management on business and corporate performance, the impact on profitability of the supply chain risks, and their impact on business and corporate performance, because those are actually the main things that are covered under these assessment criteria, okay? Under the first assessment criteria. So let's get started. As part of understanding how strategic supply chain management can support corporate business strategy, you first of all need to understand the relationship between the supply chain, business, and corporate levels of strategy. And so let's start with what exactly is a strategy. A strategy is a clear plan agreed by the main actors within an organization which sets out aims that the organization will take to achieve its operational intentions. And too many words, right? What exactly does that mean? In fact, let's look at it from a practical point of view. In this case, let's say you have a mid-sized logistics company in, say, Kenya that provides warehousing, transportation, and distribution for agricultural products like maize, beans, and fresh produce. Now, in that case, obviously you're going to have, like in the case of your company, you'll have a vision, right? So your vision could be something like to be the leading provider of reliable and affordable agricultural logistics solutions in East Africa. And so that's your vision, right? But then you also have a mission. So in this case, your mission could be to support farmers, traders, and retailers by delivering safe, timely, and cost-effective logistics services that reduce food losses and improve market access. Now that's vision and that's mission. But what about your strategic intent? Like, how exactly do you aim to get to those things? Okay, like to be the leading provider in East Africa. How do you plan to go about that? In short, we're talking about strategy, right? A strategy, that is a clear plan that shows how your company will grow to reach its goals of moving more produce, okay, cutting losses, and earning more revenue. Now these, okay, the strategy, this could be something like, so your main goal was your strategic intent, expand operations to handle 30% more agricultural produce within the next 3 years while reducing transit time and spoilage by 20%. You want to do that within 3 years. Okay, 30% in expansion, 20% in reducing wastage. But then, see, that's generally the plan, right? Now, specifically, how are you going to get there? Okay, so talk about your strategic objectives. So we have market growth, such as expand to Uganda and Tanzania by setting up 2 cross-border hubs. We have operational excellence, such as introducing, cold storage truck to reduce post-harvest losses for perishable. Technology integration, such as implementing a digital tracking system for farmers and traders, to follow their goods in real time. We have partnerships, such as collaborating with farmers and retail chains to guarantee consistent cargo volumes. Or even financial sustainability, increase revenue by 25% through new services like farm-to-market delivery package. So you see, you had a mission, you had a vision. You had a vision, you had a mission, you've had your strategy, like your strategic intent, and then you have objectives. So in short, we can sum up your strategy this way, So the strategy, in this case, what is strategy like in your business? You can sum it up by saying it's a clear plan that shows how your logistic company will grow by expanding into new markets, investing in cold trucks using technology, and partnering with farmers and retailers to reach its goals of moving more produce, cutting losses, and earning more revenue. Now, strategy isn't going to be very specific. In fact, for the most part, it's just going to be broad because you're just talking about your intent, like where you intend to go, where the company, in this case, it's a company, where your company intends to be in this given timeline. And as you do that, as you come up with that plan, other things are going to emerge, The environment you operate in is going to change, the law, all that stuff, economic reality. And so at some point, you might be forced to change your direction. But even having said that, okay, there's going to be a need for tactics, for you to figure out the tactics that are going to help you achieve that strategy. Okay, so in this case, there is strategy and then there is tactics. Okay, tactics refer to the basic operational activities and actions that make the strategy a reality. And if you look at this from a supply chain perspective, because it's all about that, right? If you look at this from a supply chain perspective, a strategy to deliver goods and service could outline the overall approach to be taken, while the tactics may relate to the negotiation, tendering, or purchasing activities. And again, since we do these theoretically and then you also look at it practically, from a practical angle, all right, DHL's strategy for delivering goods and service is to provide fast, reliable, and integrated global transport solutions by combining air, sea, and road freight, supported by digital tracking systems and a vast international network of hubs and warehouses. So basically, if you're talking about like DHL, right? Their strategy in this case is rather focuses on global reach, speed, sustainability, and technology-driven visibility. But that's a strategy, right? Very broad. Well, sort of makes sense. But what about the day-to-day activities? What exactly do they do? I mean, yeah, speed, you're talking about tech and all that. So on Monday, what is it that people are doing there? On Wednesday, what exactly are people doing in that company? So in this case, that will mean things like negotiating long-term contracts with major airlines and shipping lines to secure priority cargo space at low rate, participating in tendering process from multinational companies such as Apple, Zara, to win contracts for moving raw materials or finished goods globally. We also have employing local brokers and digital custom clearance systems to reduce border delays. So the point is that for you to understand, rather the point for you to understand is that yes, there is strategy, right? A clear plan showing where you want to go. But then there are tactics which will turn that strategy into a reality. So it isn't so much just coming up with a strategy like I want this to be the biggest supply chain and procurement channel, so you need to subscribe. Yeah, you do need to subscribe. Yes, there is that. But what about the tactics? What about the things that are going to turn that into a reality? You have to figure that one out. According to Thomas Holt, all strategies engage with 4 core principles. In this case, speed, that is the time of delivery, quality of goods or services, cost of the goods and then the cost of processing, flexibility, that is the capacity to change and adapt to different circumstances. And again, from a real point of view, from an actual business perspective, how do those things actually play about? And in this case, to understand that, let's look at Maersk, okay? One of those biggest shipping companies that you can think of. It's on top 10 big shipping companies in the world. So in this case, in terms of speed, right? This refers to how fast goods will move from origin to destination. And in terms of this company, Maersk uses both sea and air freight solutions, meaning if sea freight is delayed, the client's cargo can be shifted to air freight for urgent shipments. And the result is customers get faster delivery without completely relying on slow ocean routes. In terms of quality, so in this case, we're talking about making sure that goods arrive intact and the service is as per the customer's requirements. So Maersk has invested in reefer, that is refrigerated containers, for food and pharmaceutical. Sensors track temperature throughout the journey. Now, in terms of cost, which means the point here is to keep the costs in a way that makes sense, in a way that doesn't affect profitability. That can be achieved by leveraging economies of scale. So Maersk does this by running mega container ships that move thousands of containers at once, lowering per unit cost. Now, regarding flexibility, okay, you're talking about adjusting to circumstances, all right? Something comes up, we don't get stuck there, we need to adjust and do something this other way, because that's part of the strategy, right? So in this case, just flexibility. For example, as a result of the Red Sea shipping crisis that happened in 2024, okay, to 2025, the idea was, or rather what happened was, there were those guys who are attacking ships at the Red Sea, right? I think that's something to do. Most of those things just have something to do with political alignment and then, So when that happened, most companies were like, we are no longer going to use that route, or we are not shipping or something. But with Musk, well, they had to think, okay? So they rerouted their cargo or their ships all the way through, Africa, all the way to so they went round rather than going through the Suez Canal. I'm doing this like if you can see anyway, the point is they rerouted rather than going through the Suez Canal because the Red Sea ships were being attacked and all that stuff. Let's talk about goal and strategy. Now, a goal is not the same as strategy. A goal is an intended aim, while the strategy is the agenda used to reach that aim. The tactics or functional activities needed to achieve the strategy are then built in a manner that contributes to the intended outcomes. Let's look at that from a practical angle because it's kind of just easy if we see what these things are in practice. And let's take a company like FedEx, okay? Let's take FedEx. The global carrier and logistic company. And in this case, we are looking at FedEx, or rather we are looking at that company. It's an hypothetical scenario here, okay? So in terms of goal, tactics, and resulting outcome. So the goal, that is the intended aim, FedEx wants to increase its shares of the e-commerce delivery market in Europe by 20% within 3 years. Let's assume that is what they want to do. I'm not saying that is what they're doing, okay? So don't go to their website like fedex.com. They didn't say that. Look, so let's say they want to do that, okay? So in this case, what is their strategy? So to achieve this goal, okay, FedEx will position itself as the fastest and most reliable e-commerce delivery partner by expanding last-mile delivery networks in major cities, leveraging technology for real-time parcel tracking, building strategic partnerships with large online retailers such as Zalando or Amazon. In that case, we have a goal, the overall goal. And we also have a strategy, those things, right? But then the question is, what about the day-to-day work? What exactly are you going to be doing to achieve that strategy, or which will take us to that particular goal? So in this case, talking about tactics, that is the functional activities to implement the strategy. And so those will mean things like securing contacts with top e-commerce platforms to become their preferred logistics partners, okay? Investing, for instance, buying electronic delivery vans for urban deliveries to meet EU regulations, optimizing warehouse automation and use of AI for route planning to reduce delays, okay? Marketing, that's another thing. And all that, okay, by doing all those things, then they're going to get outcomes. In this case, the outcomes could be things like faster delivery times, which means customer satisfaction. Since they are expanding in Europe, so green operation signifies compliance with EU rules, and that is a positive for the brand. And for a business angle, okay, from a business angle, e-commerce partnership will increase their market share to the desired 20%. Right. But look, the idea here is just for you to understand what a strategy is and look at it from a practical angle and things of that. Generally, when it comes to strategies, most strategies will just be based on the following. They'll be based on growth, they'll be based on diversification or stability. So with growth, the aim is to increase the level of market share, revenue, or profitability through an expansion of the company's operation, portfolio, or geographical reach. A company like Amazon, let's say Amazon, right? So what's their growth strategy in this case? So let's say the company wants to expand in like Africa. They're already in Africa, but let's say that's their goal, to expand there. So expanding its logistics networks in Africa to reach more customers, let's assume that's a thing. And they could do this by building new warehouses and hiring more delivery drivers in Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa. And so growth as a strategy, okay? We're talking about growth as a strategy. That could simply mean doing more of what you already do, but in a bigger way. Now, in terms of diversification, because that's another one, okay? And first of all, you need to understand that companies will diversify because of a number of things, okay? There are many reasons why a company will diversify. We're talking about things like economies of scale for both production and market, knowledge transfer to an adjacent market or business, blocking competitors from influencing markets, okay? vertical integration. But then if that is your strategy, if your strategy is just let's diversify, you have to remember that there are going to be costs associated with doing that. Because for the most part, it's not just expansion. Diversification could mean we are making this product, like these batteries, and now we want to go into another market where you actually make, like cameras or something. So that's the thing. And there's a cost associated with that. Now, the next one is stability. And this is actually used by companies that are seeking a more consistent position in the market. Now, at some point, we talked about Maersk, the shipping company. So let's look at that as an example. Now, Maersk, for example, could choose to steadily protect their business by focusing on maintaining current shipping routes during times of global disruption, such as fuel price or even conflict. Now, how could they do this as a strategy? The company can delay new expansion and concentrate on serving existing customers reliably. So the idea here is just keeping what you have, okay? Keeping it strong as opposed to chasing a new idea or chasing a new opportunity. So you get into a market, stay in that market, become the biggest thing in the market, as opposed to jumping into a new thing that has come up. Let us now look at strategies for achieving goals. According to Michael Porter, there are 4 main strategies that may be employed depending on the relative competitive advantage that a company has within the market. And the thing with these strategies, okay, all the 4 of them, they have advantages. Basically, they have costs associated with them, okay? So it's not like if this one is good and therefore it depends on the market you are in, it depends on what you're trying to achieve, and it depends on the price you're willing to pay. Anyway, the strategies are number 1, cost leadership. And with cost leadership, we're just talking about finding a way to drive most people think that when you talk about cost, you're saying sell something cheap. Not really. That's a different thing. So with cost leadership, you're just saying find a way to produce the same thing that your competitors are producing, but produce it in a low cost so that even if you sell it at the same price as the rest of the people in that market, you still make a profit. Meaning what? Meaning if you are producing anything, if you're producing these lens cap, okay, these lens covers. So if the cost of producing one is say 2, whatever 2 is, that's the average cost. But then you find a way of doing it at 0.5 or even 1, and then you still sell it at 5. Then you see you're making more profit as opposed, even if you sell it at the market price, you're making more compared to your competitors. In order to achieve this, economies of scale, process efficiencies, procurement practices, and access to goods and service should be leveraged. So an example of this is Maersk using mega ships that carry over 20,000 containers at once, lowering the cost per unit. Now, number 2, we have differentiation. In this case, you want to make yourself unique. With differentiation, you're just talking about uniqueness. You want to be different. That is a thing that, separates you from your competitor. So an example here. So FedEx, as an example, okay, let's use that, differentiates through speed and reliability, offering overnight and time-definite delivery worldwide. Now let's talk about cost focus, number 3. So this is where the actual price or the actual cost comes in, okay? You are focusing specifically on having a cost advantage on certain part of the market. Meaning what? So this is different from cost leadership in that it's the price charged to consumer of that product that is the subject of the focus. So Aramex, okay? Aramex, which is, again, a logistics company. Aramex focuses on emerging markets such as Africa, Middle East, okay, where giants like DHL and FedEx are more expensive. The company keeps its operations lean, partners with local carriers, and provides affordable logistics services to SMEs. And the 4th one is differentiation focus. Now, with differentiation, you're just saying you target a specific part of the market, and then you become unique in that specific part of the market. For example, having a smaller, more defined group of products or specialist services. Now, an example here, we have a company like Kuehne Nagel, okay, which specializes in pharmaceutical and healthcare supply chain. So temperature sensitive, or even high security cargo. Now, those are examples of strategies that you can use. I mean, those are generic examples of strategies. So there are many, but those are the ones that Porter suggested. Moving on, let's talk about factors that influence corporate strategy. And there are a number of factors. So these factors can be internal, they can be external, right? And there are a number of them. So let's start with external factors, which will include, so external factors anyway, include things like competitors within the market, new industry entrants, development of substitute products, and the relative economic position of goods sold. And then we have internal factors, which in this case will be things like company politics and restructuring, change management and cycles of renewals of management positioning, products life cycles, and the opportunity to maximize the potential return on research and development, shareholder and stakeholder influence and preference, as well as opportunity for investment. Look, the whole point here was for you to understand a number of things relating to strategy, from what is strategy, the difference between a goal and a strategy, example of strategies that you can use and all that. Look, as you go through these, you're probably under the impression that with a strategy, you must be doing something. But the truth is, sometimes not doing something, in short, non-decision, can also be a strategy. What are we talking about? You're simply saying that when a company chooses to do something, right? When a company decides that we are only going to be selling to retailers, then it means they've strategically decided that they're also not going to be selling to consumers directly, okay? So non-strategy, that decision, not non-strategy, non-decision, by not doing something, that can also be a strategy. So you always have to understand that, because there is a cost associated with that as well. Now, at this point, you're now in a position to talk about the relationship between supply chain, business, and corporate levels of strategy. And that means you understand what a strategy is, the difference between goal and strategy, strategies for achieving goal, as well as factors that influence corporate strategy. But even having known that, okay, guess what? You still need to understand the impact of supply chain management on business and corporate performance, as well as the impact of supply chain on profitability. Meaning, what exactly is supply chain and how does it impact organizational performance? What do we mean by profitability? And what are some ways a supply chain manager can help with profitability? The impact of supply chain management on business and corporate performance. First of all, the supply chain is the network of links that tie together the production and distribution of goods and services from producer to consumer. And to practically understand what is going on here, because I mean, theory, and then you do these, and then you're like, yeah, we understand. Look, let's look at it from a practical angle. And in this case, let's assume that you are dealing with a coffee shop. Okay, so you make latte, sell them, blah, blah, blah. You are basically your own version of Starbucks. From a supply chain perspective, the first thing you need to be the first thing that will happen in this coffee shop of yours is the raw materials supply, which is the first link in that supply chain, and that means upstream operations. Okay, so when you talk about upstream operations, you're just saying the suppliers and the suppliers and the suppliers, because the other version is downstream operation. We're talking about the buyers and the buyers and the buyers. All right. So in this case, let's assume these things are coming from different countries. Yes, you could be getting raw materials from your country, but let's assume they're coming from different countries so that supply chain is actually bigger. So that means coffee beans from Ethiopia, right? Milk from your local farmers, sugar imported from, say, Uganda, right? Then those things have to be processed, right? So the processing, because they have to be turned into something that can actually be used. I mean, otherwise, what exactly are you doing with coffee beans directly from the farm? Right, so the coffee beans are harvested, dried, and roasted by a coffee processing company in Ethiopia. Milk is pasteurized and packed or packaged by a dairy company. Sugar is refined in Uganda, okay, in a Ugandan factory. Again, as I say, the idea is to put them into something that can actually be used. Now, the next thing in this supply chain is transportation and logistics. So the roasted coffee beans are shipped from Ethiopia to your country. Milk is delivered daily by the dairy refrigerated vans, and then sugar is also delivered. And these companies, the logistic companies, are going to have to deal with, the clearance, customs, and things of that nature. So those are things that you just have to know that can also affect how things move in the supply chain, because everything in supply chain just depends on the logistics. Like, how do we get things from point of origin to where they are needed? Right, now the next thing is retail and customer service, so your downstream operations. The coffee shop grinds the beans, froths the milk, adds sugar, serves a latte to the customers. The assumption you're making here is that things are moving one way. See, that just leaves the supply chain open. But then to close it, we can also have reverse logistics, where things move the other way. So reverse logistics in this case, because in most cases when you talk about reverse logistics, you're assuming that you bought something, okay? You bought a thing, it's not functioning, and therefore you return it. That's just one aspect of reverse logistics. So in this case, our reverse logistics will be in the form of used coffee grounds are collected and sold to farmers as organic fertilizer. The shop recycles packaging waste through local recycling companies. So this way, the supply chain loop is closed and you have sustainability. And sustainability is an important thing. It's one of those things that we take for granted because it has been politicized, and then there are a lot of yahoos who just do things. Like, you see them on the road with their banners, and then like a car won't pass, and then if you ask what's wrong with it, yeah, we are, I don't know, sort of demonstrating against using petrol or something. You're not about that. We're talking about sustainability in this case. We're talking about whenever you're using something, okay, your ability to benefit from a thing in a way that doesn't affect the future generation's ability to benefit from the same thing or things along those scenarios. Like, the fact that you have water in your house doesn't mean that you can now leave the taps open, and then when somebody asks you, say, yeah, well, I'm paying for them, okay? Or something like electricity. So you have another room, the bulb is on, or the fluorescent is on, or the lights are on. And then when you ask, you're like, yeah, well, I can't pay for that. No one is questioning your financial capability. We're just talking about using the thing in a sustainable manner. So the same thing happens with the supply chain. Anyway, moving on. So the most successful businesses in the world have made it a core part of their strategy to develop their supply chain capacity and management process. How does supply chain impact on the performance of, be it the corporate level or even the business level? That's the question here. And it will do so by, the following. There is improved material flow through the business. Effective supply chain offers data from one step of the process to the next through the use of customer and supplier relationship management tools. It helps the organization know how to respond to the market. But then the question at this point becomes how supply chain impacts profitability. What is profitability? Profitability is the degree of financial benefit that a company accrues from undertaking. This is typically the difference between the cost of undertaking an operation, making a product, or fulfilling a service, and the price that goods or service can be sold for. But it's not just enough for a company to be profitable. Okay, companies want to have various sources of revenue or income, which means various sources of profits. And that means making strategic decisions regarding how to go about that, right? I mean, it is an equivalent of somebody who sells an ebook or a book, okay? So they can think, well, you can sell this in hard copy, you can sell it in soft copy. We can also do a podcast about the book. We can do a YouTube video, you can do some movie. All those are various ways in which they are making money from that one product. Now, the strategic decisions regarding profits in companies can be through the following. Number one, you can have something like markup on profit. So a markup is a percentage figure of the cost of production that is added to all goods and services sold by a company. For example, cost of production, let's say that's 100 per unit. Cost of fulfillment, that's $20. And so the profit in this case is 12. Why? That is 10% on cost. So markup here percentage was 10% on the cost. What was the cost? 100 plus 20, that's 120. 10% of that is $12. And so the total charged to the customer will be 132. So that way we can have our 12 in profit. So the thing with markup is that you need to understand that just because you can increase the percentage, your markup, okay? And then that means you're going to make more profit, because in this case, you say 10%. But then let's say you put it at 20%, so you're making more profit, right? but without really increasing the number of cells. What you have to factor in is that that will increase the final cost of that thing, okay, or the price, and then that could also mean that you're going to lose out on your sales. So not all products you can do that. You always have to ask yourself, is this, is the market price sensitive? Of course, there are certain things you can get away with that. For example, luxury brands. In fact, it would appear that in those markets, the higher the price, the more the people assume that that product is. It's like those the Louboutins, those shoes with red soles, ones for Christian Louboutins. So yeah, of course the price is high. Why? Because the sole is red or something. I don't know. It's just perception that people have in terms of luxury brand. The more expensive it is, the better, and therefore they buy. So that's one thing that a company can do, markup. Now, number 2, reduction in cost of production. So this actually goes to you trying to achieve the cost leadership. Meaning what? Meaning in this case, as an example, so cost of production could be 90 per unit, meaning a 10% reduction in cost. Remember, initially it was 100, right? That's what we're using. So the cost of fulfillment still remains the same, it's 20. And so our profit in this case is going to be $22. That is a 16% profit level. So what is happening here? So the total charged is still going to be 132. All right? So that's that, it's still 132. So in this case, the price you're charging is the same, it's still 132. But what have we done? We've just reduced the cost of producing that thing. So if our competitors was producing it at 100 as we are doing it at 90. So there is that. So this is why understanding your supply chain is important, because it will mean renegotiation of supply terms and costs, finding alternative suppliers, finding substitute products, optimizing the specification. This could include repackaging of goods to optimize size and storage space, partnering with other companies to obtain bulk discounts, reverse engineering the products process to identify where products may be optimized, optimizing in services such as reducing the cost of transport, communication, and time lags between stages of production. Okay, right, so let's catch up. We've said that if you want to, profit, right? You can do that by, number 1, just markup. Okay, playing around with your markup. Or number 2, reduce the cost of production. And the third thing that you can do is fulfillment costs. So in this case, the cost of fulfillment covers the logistics, shipping, packaging, and delivery of goods to the end customer. And sometimes the cost can also include things like if you invoice. So there's a cost of invoicing. If you receive money, there's a transfer or charge on that money. So all these are just costs of fulfillment. So from our example, cost of production is 100 per unit, right? And then now the cost of fulfillment, we are reducing that one by 10%. So from 20 to 18. So that gives us $18. Profit in this case is going to be 14. That's a 12% profit level, because we are still charging the same amount, $132. Now look, from a supply chain point of view, because if you're looking at those ones, you're thinking, well, how exactly does a supply chain manager comes in? As a supply chain manager who's trying to help their company to make profit, the choices in this case, what we've talked about cost of fulfillment, we've talked about the cost of production, and also talked about the markup. Now, the markup, that's going to be an accounting decision for the most part. But the cost of production and the cost of fulfillment, those are areas where the supply chain manager can really help the company to make more profit, because most of those things just involved dealing with aspects of supply chain. Like in production, you're just dealing with aspects of supply chain, with a few exceptions in terms of R&D, okay? So the research, the engineers, and all that stuff, right? But then you can do that. You can help with costs, of fulfillment and cost of production. Now, the other way that you can also increase profit as a supply chain manager is through inventory holding, so inventory management. You want to make sure that you are not having unnecessary stock, because that just means you're incurring the cost associated with holding those stocks, and that reduces your profit. Okay? So if there is any question, let me know. Okay, look, the whole point of this, was for you to be in a position to assess the relationship between functional, business, and corporate levels of strategy. And so far, what exactly have we looked at? Okay, so far we've looked at the relationship between supply chain, business, and corporate levels of strategy, the impact of supply chain management on business and corporate performance, as well as the impact on profitability of the supply chain. But since you're talking about global issues here, okay, global strategies, with globalization, there are risks that you need to understand, and those risks are obviously going to affect supply chain. And so we need to talk about that, which means we need to look at supply chain risks and their impact on business and corporate performance. And so that means in this case, we are going to define risks, types of risks, and practically look at risk management strategies. Okay, let's move on. There are a number of issues that increase the risks in global business environment. For instance, geographical distance, integration between economies, climate change, political instability, etc. What exactly does any of those things, what exactly do any of those things mean in supply chain? It means a supply chain manager needs to have capacity to balance the potential impact of a risk with the potential opportunities. So let's take something like the Russia-Ukraine conflict. I mean, how long has that thing been going on for? Since I think 2022 or something. So Ukraine is big on exporting things like grain, sunflower oil, while Russia, supplies large volumes of natural gas, crude oil, and fertilizers. And with the war, you have blockades, sanctions, and other things that affect supply chain. Globally, this means that supply chain managers have to respond, They have to respond to, especially if whatever you're doing or whatever you're using came from those parts, then you can't just be like, well, there's a war going on and therefore, no, you have to respond to that. And that will mean things like finding other suppliers for grain, like Brazil, logistics rerouting, with Black Sea port blocked, supply chain managers coordinate rail, road shipments through Poland, Romania, the Baltic states to move Ukrainian exports. The point is, as a supply chain manager, you have to be in a position to identify risks and come up with risk management strategies. Now, let's start with the basics here. Let's start with understanding something like what is risk. So in a simpler term, a risk is the possibility of something happening. If something is unlikely to occur or is not measurable by a manager, then this is defined as an uncertainty. The truth is, there are a lot of uncertainties in business. We just got good at measuring them and figuring them out. For example, the weather. Using weather tools to predict how the weather will be like next year is a wastage of time. But the same tool can help us to know what to expect tomorrow. So the point is for you to remember that risk, as we're continuing, risk can be positive, risk can be negative. It just depends on how you go about it. Let's talk about types of risks. Now, the type of risks that will exist in a business, all these risks, they tend to be the same. The difference is always just the likelihood of occurring and the impact. So we're talking about supply chain related risks. These risks are more or less the same whether you're talking about the corporate level or the business level. In fact, a small corner shop will be far less affected by risks of foreign exchange fluctuation than a large multinational company that moves capital and goods across border on a day-to-day basis. But both the small business and that big company are still going to be affected by currency fluctuation. So the only difference is the magnitude. So it's not like if, that's big people problem and this is small company, whatever. They're all going to be affected. The magnitude is what differs. Risks can be internal or they can be external. So example of external risks in this case, we have supply risks, which are risks caused by factors such as any interruption to the flow of product, whether raw materials or parts, poor quality of supplied products, subsystems, components, and materials, quality and management issues arising from outsourcing, variability in lead times, or even delays in transportation. So most of these ones are just going to be upstream related, They relate to the upstream aspect of your supply chain. Then we also have demand risks. So in this case, you're looking at the buyer side of things, and the risks here are caused by factors such as unpredictable or misunderstood customer or end customer demand, loss of major customers, volatility of demand, concentration of customer base, short life cycles, inaccurate forecast. We have environmental risks. So these are risks in the area that supply chain is taking place, and they include things like the macro risks or economic shifts, recession, exchange rates, social or labor unrest. We have natural disasters, we have climate factors, we have policy risks, okay? And then we have business risks, which in this case are caused by factors such as a supplier's financial or management stability. We also have purchase and sale of supplier's company. Those are external risks, but then we also have internal risks. So which are the internal risks? Remember, these are risks. Internal risks are risks now inside your organization. That there are risks that your organization, basically they have to do with the organization, because external have to do with the environment in which your organization is operating under. So in this case, we're talking about things like managing things like manufacturing and process risks. For example, machine breaking down. We have business risks, which could be caused by things like change in key personnel, business process, such as the way purchaser communicate to supplier and customers, network planning and control risks. We have security risks, we have mitigation and contingency risks caused by inadequate contingencies to cover unforeseen events. We also have cultural risks caused by a business cultural tendency to hide or delay negative information. So look, the point is just what exactly are risks, okay? And what are some of the types of risks that you could be dealing with? And from a global point of view, okay, that's what you're looking at here, because if you're just saying, well, risks, blah, blah, blah. No, I wanted to look at this risk not just in terms of how they affect your business right now, but if you're dealing with supply chain on a global scale, how exactly do those risks affect you as well? Let us now talk about risk management strategies. The first thing you need to do is identify the risk. After identifying them, you have to classify them in terms of the likelihood of that risk happening and the impact, okay, if it happens. So is it severe? Is it mild? Is it, all that. So once you've done that, then you can come up with strategies to deal with those risks. And risk management is the process of identifying, then strategizing a resolution to a risk or series of risks. Now, in some companies, we have people whose job it is to specifically figure those things out. Like they just have a risk management department, something like that. Okay, the way they'll call it will obviously differ. But the supply chain manager has to engage in risk management activities on an almost daily basis in order to balance the risk and rewards from every supply chain action. And there are 4 classic ways of dealing with risks. So in this case, we're talking about tolerate, treat, transfer, or terminate. And here's how a supply chain manager can use any of those strategies. So let's start with tolerate. And in this case, the risk could be too small to justify the action to be taken. Okay. An example, if you run a global apparel company importing cotton from India and you're aware of an oncoming monsoon, you can accept seasonal delays caused by the monsoon. Now, what you're actually going to do, okay, just I'm like, yeah, there's a monsoon, you've accepted it. Nope, you could have buffer stock because you know that, well, that's a possibility. The weather can be bad and then you can't have import and then there is that. Now, number 2, treat. So in this case, you aim to reduce the risk by taking proactive measures to minimize the likelihood or impact of the risk. Let's say you are an automobile company, and in this case, you are getting your semiconductors chips from Asia. Now, you just can't be like, yeah, well, Taiwan, they make good semiconductors, and therefore I'm just going to rely on that. What if one day there's a problem there? So the way to deal with this sort of risk will be to have several suppliers in several regions. That way, yes, you have your dominant supplier, but then you have these other suppliers. So if things don't go according to plan, you can switch. That is the reason why companies like Apple have all these lists of suppliers. And at some point, they even do them in-house to avoid the problems associated with, like, anytime there is an issue between, say, China, US, and then Taiwan is involved in that, and then you end up having all these semiconductors problems. Like the other time you saw when there are all these tariffs and stuff, which, whatever, political. And then companies like Nvidia, okay, they are to cut a deal. They're like, okay, look, we're going to pay you this percentage to the government so that our goods from, say, China aren't going to be tariffed this much. So those are things that happen politically, and so you're trying to avoid that by fixing your supply chain by treating. Now, number 3, transfer. Okay. In this case, the supply chain manager shifts the financial or operational consequence of risk to another stakeholder, often through contracts or insurance. So a shipping company, for example, that is moving goods, okay, and maybe the route they're using is prone to things like piracy. So that shipping company can purchase a marine insurance to cover losses if vessels are hijacked. Okay. Now, in this case, the risk is still there. So by buying insurance doesn't mean that now you've gotten rid of the risk. What you've actually done is you've just shifted the financial and operational burden in this case. And so the fourth one is to terminate. Now, in this case, you look at the entire thing and then decide, well, it's not worth it. Let's just abandon the whole thing. Now, look, you could be looking at this one and thinking, yeah, well, those scenarios, different companies, but is it possible for one event to occur and then in that one event we apply all the 4 T's? Yes, okay. I mean, yeah, I've given you different scenarios, different examples. But if you look at something like the Red Sea crisis, okay? So sometimes back, I mean, the Red Sea's issues. So we have these groups that are attacking seas there, attacking ships there, okay? For reasons known to them. Some of these reasons are political, some are just theft, whatever. I mean, look, it's complicated, man. People just have to make money. And some of the ways they go about them are, yeah. So what happened? In this case, that led to shipping companies like Maersk, MSC, Hypergloy to suspend their Red Sea operations, forcing rerouting around the Cape of Good Hope. Okay? So that's it for these companies. They're like, yeah, well, let's not just use that route anymore. Let's use others. But then there are companies that elected to go with the treat option, which means they looked at the odds and decided, well, those people are targeting those particular shipping companies. Ours are too small. They're not going to do anything. So let's just continue the operations. And they continued the operations. Went through that, used the Suez Canal, and continued. But then there are others which elected to treat. So large firms, okay, didn't leave things to chance. So they hired private escorts, okay. Some adjusted their shipping schedules to avoid high-risk windows. Others increased their buffer stocks, okay. Of course, that didn't eliminate the risk. It sort of just reduced the exposure to the risk. Other companies chose to shift the burden to third parties, okay. Of course, some chose to stop the entire thing, as you've already pointed. They're like, yeah, we're not using that anymore. So if there is any question, you ask, all right?